Hello, my name is Creed and welcome to Riders Blockbuster. Today's video is pretty special because I've decided to break down the Waxwork duology. These two films have a story that takes place only hours apart from each other, and I think that they're best enjoyed together, so that's what we're gonna do. It'll be fun to see if you can name all of the films referenced in these two amazing movies, but be warned, there are spoilers ahead. Also, subscribing really helps the channel out, so if you enjoy videos like this, then be sure to leave a sub. We open in a mansion, and we see a quick sequence of the mansion owner getting robbed and burned in the fireplace. Years later, in that same mansion, we meet Mark and learn that the man that we saw burned was his grandfather. Mark is having a conversation with his mother, and it turns out that she still sees him as a bit of a child and doesn't think he can handle big boy things like coffee.
But Mom, I need the caffeine badly.
Mark heads out to college, but we meet his butler, Jenkins, just as he's leaving. We then meet two girls named China and Sarah. While they're walking to school, they stumble upon a waxwork that they had never seen before. They question where it came from, but suddenly the owner of the waxwork appears.
You lose!
He invites them to a private midnight viewing of the wax museum and specifies that their party needs to be of 6 people with no more and no less. The girls run off, but they say that they will likely attend that private showing. Mark meets up with China and Sarah, and we meet the rest of their crew, James, Gemma, and Tony.
You, Tony!
China tells them all about the waxwork, and the group agrees to go and check it out that night. They get to the waxwork, but Gemma and James get too freaked out and they decide not to even enter the building.
Women. Hey honey, wait up!
The doors open and the doorman, Hans, invites them inside.
We were expecting more.
Hans tells them all to get comfortable before bowing and making an exit. The door to the exhibits opens on its own, and the group enters. Inside, we see multiple wax displays showing scenes from popular horror films and stories. The group separates, and Tony accidentally drops his lighter into one of the displays. He crosses the rope, but when he enters the display, it's as if he's warped into another time completely. His clothes and hairs change, and it looks like he's deep in a forest. He rationalizes that he's just been hypnotized somehow, and determines that the house in the distance must be the way to go. He knocks, but the man inside shouts for him to go away and go far from the cabin. Despite that, Tony enters and comes face to face with Gimli himself.
I know your father was my dearest friend.
I cannot jump the distance you have to test me!
This man thinks that Tony is someone named Jack, and as the light of the full moon washes over him, he starts to change. He runs into another room, but when he comes back, the man has completely transformed into a werewolf. He charges at Tony and bites his arm. As that's happening, 2 strangers walk in, saying that it's too late. Also, for some reason they didn't have the rifle loaded before they went in, so one of the men dies while trying to distract the werewolf so that the other can reload the gun. The beast is shot by the silver bullet and it swiftly dies. Tony begins writhing in pain as he undergoes a transformation, but the man turns his rifle to the new werewolf and puts him down as well. As we pan around, we see that all of this seems to change back into a wax display. It's a super cool transition, I loved it. We now see that China is enamored with the vampire display. As she crosses into that display, she appears inside the castle, and a handsome man calls for her to join the others at the table. The man says that China's fiancé couldn't join them due to some unknown circumstances, but she doesn't ask questions as a bowl of raw meat is placed in front of her.
I haven't had steak tartare in a long time.
Oh yes. Steak tartare.
The moment China takes a bite, the others begin to dig in as well, devouring their, tartare ferociously.
It's a little salty. But that's all part of its charm.
After eating, China is sent to her quarters for the night. One of the men then enters her room and attacks her, showing us that this is indeed a vampire story. China runs from her room and hides in the basement with a man named Charles, who says that he's her fiancé. When she turns on the light, we see that Charles's leg is missing, leaving only a bone and foot. He tells China that everyone in the castle is a vampire.
And they can only be killed by a crucifix wood through their heart or decapitation.
The man from before then bursts in. He rushes at China and they dance around the table. This whole scene, things randomly hit Charles's exposed leg, and it seems so painful. Like, he's screaming, and it just adds to the chaos really well. I loved it and hated it. China picks up 2 knives and she makes a cross out of them. She places the cross against the vampire's forehead, and he freaking explodes. The 3 female vamps then enter, but China is armed with a wooden stake, and she takes care of them faster than Anakin took out the younglings in episode 3. China runs out of the room, but the Count stops her. She looks into his eyes, and all hope is lost as she becomes charmed. She steps near him, and the Count sinks his fangs into her neck. We then cut back to Mark, who has noticed that China and Tony are both missing. Sarah is mesmerized by another display, but just before she enters, Mark finds her and says that he wants to leave to find the missing duo. As they're leaving, Mark says that he's not sure if he really ever liked China, or if he was just interested in her because she was hard to get, and Sarah says that she knows what he means, showing us that she's got a bit of a crush on our main man, Mark. A bit later, a football player named Jonathan enters the Waxwork looking for his friends. He's staring at the Phantom of the Opera display.
Intense sniff.
The Waxwork man then shoves Jonathan into the display, and the next thing we see is him laying dead, and now made of wax. Back to Mark and Sarah. Mark tries to make his move, but Sarah pulls away.
I really like you and I think you're very attractive.
Come on.
She says that she wants a real relationship, and she wants to wait before they do anything. The following morning, Mark reads over his homework, which he had his maids do for him.
I think dictators are the bad people. They have the shouting voices and the small mustaches.
He then calls Tony and China's houses and finds that neither of them made it home the night before. He goes to the police where we meet Detective Roberts. Normally the cops wouldn't take this seriously, but there have been 13 missing people in the last 2 weeks, so the detective is willing to listen. Mark takes Roberts to the Waxwork, but the Waxwork man lays on the charm and comes across as completely normal. He gives the detective a quick tour of the displays and nearly shoves him inside of one of them, but ultimately the detective ends up leaving, but he's got a feeling that Mark isn't completely crazy. The detective looks at a few of the missing case files, and he thinks that some of the people in the wax displays looked awfully similar to some of the missing people. He sneaks back inside of the Waxwork to check for himself. When he gets to the Dracula display, we see where the scene ended earlier with China. The detective takes a sample from her face, but it seems that the girl is completely made of wax. Mark then takes Sarah up to the attic where most of his grandfather's things are stored. He remembered the Waxwork man's face from something of his grandfather's, so he wants to go check out to make sure that he's not losing his mind. He pulls out an old newspaper and reads about the only suspect in his grandfather's murder, which was a man named Mr. Lincoln, who looks just like the Waxwork man. Back to the detective. He's wandering inside of the Waxwork when he walks into the Egyptian display, earning himself a trip directly to a mummy's tomb. The architect pulls out a scroll that reads of an ancient curse that was placed on the tomb, and a moment later, the sarcophagus opens and out steps the mummy. They do their best to fight it off, but once bullets prove to have no effect on the mummy, it lifts the detective and slams him down inside of the coffin before placing a stone slab on top of it, trapping him in the display for eternity. Mark goes to visit Sir Wilfrid, his godfather and his grandfather's friend. They tell Sir Wilfrid what's happened. Sir Wilfrid then says that they were right to be worried. It turns out that Mark's grandfather had collected 18 trinkets from evil people over his lifetime.
Well?
To divide 18 into 3?
6, 6, and 6.
Yes, the number of the devil.
Sir Wilfrid also knows of Mr. Lincoln. He used to own a waxwork in the city, but it failed, and the man sold his soul to the devil for longevity, and in exchange, he is Satan's personal disciple. Wilfrid tells them of a voodoo ritual that requires a wax effigy and the soul of a believing victim, which could give new life to these evil beings. He tells Mark to go back to the waxwork and destroy the displays, and as Mark and Sarah leave, he makes a phone call.
Tell the others our Mr. Lincoln has been found.
Sir, this is Burger King.
It has begun.
Mark and Sarah break into the waxwork, but before they can ignite the displays, they're pushed inside. Sarah winds up inside of a display with a pirate who believes that pain and pleasure go hand in hand.
Being a pirate is a recipe.
He ties up Sarah and begins to whip her for the king's entertainment. Mark, on the other hand, has wound up in a black and white zombie world. He stumbles through a graveyard and chops off a zombie's hand as it grabs onto him. When he gets to the gate, he stabs the hand on top of it, but finds that he can't move beyond the graveyard's border. He declares to the zombies that this isn't real.
If I don't believe in you, then you don't exist. And I hope I'm right.
He then jumps from the display. The waxwork workers try to stop him, but he leaps into Sarah's display and beats up one of the guards. The king then declares that Sarah must die by whipping, and the pirate is happy to oblige. Mark then walks in with a gun in hand, and he unchains Sarah. He tells her that none of these men can hurt them unless they believe otherwise. He then hands the pirate his gun, and when the pirate shoots, the bullet doesn't hit Mark. The man tries to strike at Mark, but his hits go straight through. Mark then takes Sarah's hand, and they leave together. When they exit, they fall to the feet of the waxwork crew. Sarah and Mark are grabbed and watch as Gemma and James walk in, only to become drawn to the displays that they had just escaped. But Gemma and James aren't so lucky, and they succumb to the wax. The waxwork man then says that those were the final 2 souls needed, and commands his wax creations to rise. And that's exactly what happens. Each monster from each display begins to come to life. Even the victims that had once been human rise, now monsters of their own.
Run! Run! There's no way to run!
Mark and Sarah are trapped, but suddenly the doors open and Sir Wilfrid and his posse of old warriors arrive, including Jenkins, Mark's butler that we saw earlier. Wilfrid hands Mark his grandfather's sword and says that if any of the wax creations make it out of the waxwork, then all hell will break free on Earth. So they have to make a stand now. The battle between monsters and geriatric patients begins, but it's more epic than you may expect. The pirate from before holds his own, fighting off all those who attack. China finds Mark and apologizes before kissing down his neck. She suddenly hisses and we see that Jenkins saved Mark's life because China was full-on a vampire, man. Unfortunately, Jenkins is killed a moment later when a large man stabs him in the heart.
Give my love to the missus. Get those bastards.
Now, fueled with rage and his grandfather's sword, Mark goes after the pirate. Also, Dracula tries to flee by turning into a bat, and we get this awesome scene.
Make my day.
Mark and the pirate cross blades, and somehow Mark is able to hold his own, for a few seconds at least. Mostly the pirate just plays with Mark. He disarms him a few times, only to give him his sword right back. And as he's playing around, enjoying the amateur fight, he decides that it's time to finally end things.
Kill the wimp.
Just before the final blow, an axe is thrown into the pirate's back, and he's shocked to see Sarah repaying her debt. Their triumphant moment is short-lived, though, as Lincoln pulls a gun free from the rafters and tells Mark and Sarah that it's time to die. Mark tries to talk his way out of it, but it doesn't work. What does work is when Sir Wilfrid shows up and shoots Lincoln in the chest, causing him to fall into a vat of his own wax. Mark and Sarah try to warn Sir Wilfrid, but the waxwork is up in flames, and it's too late to help, as something sneaks up behind him.
Oh my goodness!
Sarah and Mark make it out moments before the waxwork is completely engulfed in flame. They walk away, but as we stare at the burning rubble, we see that the zombie hand has made it out of the waxwork and is ready to wreak havoc on the world. Waxwork 1 ends, but Waxwork 2 picks up immediately, and we see that after the waxwork burned down, Sarah and Mark hopped into a taxi to head home. The dismembered hand hitches a ride with the duo, and we see that Sarah's looking a bit different. Deborah Foreman, the original actress, had a falling out with the director, so she was recast, but her character is still the same Sarah from the previous movie. The taxi arrives at Sarah's house, and we get a glance into her home life. It turns out that she's living fairly rough. Her mother died and left her abusive stepfather as her only guardian. Also, he's drinking beer brand beer, made by beer for beer. Stay thirsty, my beers. While Sarah is in her room, the hand makes its move. It jumps onto her stepfather and begins to choke him out. Sarah rushes out and throws the hand across the room, but it lands in a toolbox and it arms itself with a hammer. It quickly rushes at the stepdad and bonks him bloody. Sarah is able to handle things though. She gets a quick spray with mustard and onions.
Time to deliver a
hot dog.
But she's able to shove the hand into the disposal, transforming the formerly wax hand into a geyser of blood.
Mark, you said it was over! You said it was over!
A bit later, Sarah is on trial for the murder of her stepfather.
And she blames it on a hand.
Guilty.
She told the truth about what happened, but I mean, let's be honest, it sounds completely crazy. The trial is ongoing, and Mark knows that it's time to pull out all the stops to prove that Sarah is innocent. They head to Sir Wilfrid's house, and when they enter, a message from the man himself begins to play.
Because I must be dead.
Sir Wilfrid says that the only reason that the duo would have come to his mansion was because something went wrong and the Waxwork monsters weren't stopped. He says that he left all of his belongings to Mark, including all of his grandfather's relics. He leaves a cryptic clue of where to find the relics, but Sarah solves it really easily, moving a chess piece and revealing a secret passage behind the mirror. Inside the secret chamber, they find all sorts of goodies, including silver bullets, the stake of Van Helsing himself, and a hockey mask that belongs to no one in particular. Sarah is about to look at a painting, but Mark stops her as he begins to read a scroll that was attached to a strange pendant. The pendant is a Cartagrian time door opener. It's a relic that is used to open gates in time and space and allow people to travel through them, similarly to how the Waxwork displays allowed people to travel into pockets of time. It's Mark's idea to head through one of the time doors to find some proof that Sarah isn't crazy and that a hand really did kill her stepfather. With no other option, Sarah agrees and they open the pendant and jump into a time gate. As they're falling, a bat-like creature swoops in and carries Sarah away. Mark then begins to have visions of his past. He's playing catch with his father with a globe for some reason, and then he sees himself in his own mother's womb, but that's neither here nor there, as his next destination is in a mansion owned by a man named Victor Frankenstein.
My name, it's pronounced Frankenstein.
On the upper floor is Sarah, although it appears that she believes she's a woman named Elizabeth who belongs in this time and place. Frankenstein believes Mark is a man named Henry, and he sends Henry into the basement to feed his latest creation.
Hey, I know. We could send out for a pizza. Okay.
The monster is used to eating slop, but one look at the stuff and Mark knows that it shouldn't be eaten at all. He finds a plate of leftovers on Frankenstein's desk and pockets Frankenstein's personal journal before feeding the monster and running upstairs. He then sneaks into Sarah's room, but she believes that she is truly a woman named Elizabeth. It's a similar concept to the original, where if the person believes they belong in that time that they appear in, then that time begins to possess their minds. Mark is able to convince Sarah of who she really is, and he says that they can use Frankenstein's journal to reanimate the dead in their own time to prove that they aren't crazy. Together, they sneak back to the time door, but they're too late as the angry townsfolk have arrived to deal with Frankenstein's monster. They're chased into the basement where they unchain the monster. Mark tries to test if they are truly in danger, because when they were in the Waxwork, if they believed that they weren't in danger, then they couldn't be hurt. But those were just pockets of time brought to life by Satan magic, and now it seems that they are truly in the time that they appear in, so Mark is grabbed and choked by Frankenstein's monster, despite him not believing he could be hurt. The monster then looks at the barrel of slop and associates it with Frankenstein, so he drops Mark and goes after the mad creator. Sarah slips into the time door, but Mark realizes that he dropped Frankenstein's journal and he goes back for it. In one of my absolutely favorite scenes, Victor Frankenstein is squeezed to death by his monster, causing an awesome and just super stylized death. When Mark gets back to the time door, he finds that it's been closed, and he's forced to use the pendant to find a new way out of this time. He arrives in a black and white world as a man named Douglas. He's a ghost hunter working alongside Groovy Bruce himself, and his night is only getting started. At the same time, we see that Sarah wound up in a ship floating above Earth. She's the captain of the crew, and I can't hide it at all, like, it's so perfectly obvious. She's in the film Alien. The crew is going crazy, and aliens are popping out of their crewmates' chests. The alarm blares telling them that the cargo lift is coming down, and that can only mean that the alien has tracked them to where they are and will be there at any moment. They make a quick decision to suit up and travel outside of the ship to try and get to the escape shuttle, but as they're suiting up, they have one last stand. The alien barrels down the corridor and skewers one of the men before squashing his head. Sarah blows a hole in the ship, and the other crew members make it outside just in time. Back to Mark, we see that he's unable to get the Cartagrian pendant to work, and he'll have to embrace his role as a ghost hunter until he can figure out why. The world around him gets suddenly loud before the door opens on its own. The other ghost hunters rush out, and we're introduced to Eleanor, Gloria, and John Loftmore, who is a distant ancestor of Mark. Mark and John go to check the equipment, but after some time, Mark goes to check on the other two.
Sorry.
They're completely fine, and when Mark gets back to where John was, now John's missing. When he goes searching, the door closes and an apparition of a girl appears. She points and shouts that there's something underneath the diamond, but before he can ask any questions, the door bulges with human-like shapes before the room floods with blood. Mark finds Eleanor crying in the hallway and looks up to see Gloria was hanged by one of the ghosts. Gloria comes to life for a brief moment, causing Mark to get distracted while Eleanor wanders off. Mark follows her into the basement, where we see John has been strapped up and his chest has been opened, although he's still in really oddly high spirits.
Oh, that's a little late for that now, Douglas, but thanks just the same. You've always been a good sort.
While Mark is looking for some tools to cut John down, he unties the rope that's holding him up, causing the poor man to fall onto his face.
That was the wrong rope, Douglas.
They hoist him back up, and John tells Mark that the ghost of the child must be laid to rest. Her body needs to be cleansed, but the body is missing, so they can't properly read the prayers that they need to. Mark walks away and slips on John's blood, which just so happens to be in the shape of a perfect diamond. Mark puts two and two together and lifts up the stone slab to reveal the girl's hidden body. Unfortunately, Eleanor has been possessed and grabs John's Bible. As Mark approaches, she begins to throw things at him, but everything misses and ends up hitting John, allowing Mark to punch her lights out and grab the Bible. He follows John's orders and begins to read.
Douglas, the book is upside down.
In the middle of the passage, Gloria descends wielding a knife. Mark continues to read and finishes the prayer moments before Gloria is of any danger. The girl's soul flies from the bones and into the sky, breaking the curse that was placed on the house. Mark looks to the pendant and realizes that it's now pointing to a time door, so he'll be able to go.
You'll be all right. Oh, sure. It's only a flesh wound.
Sarah has made it to the escape shuttle. Unfortunately, the last of her crewmates has an alien in his belly. It begins to emerge from his throat and it latches onto Sarah. While she's wriggling around on the ground, Mark arrives and chops the baby alien with an axe, and the duo are reunited. Mark reveals that he's been on quite a journey that we didn't get to see. The Loch Ness Monster unfortunately ate Frankenstein's journal, but he brought a voodoo coffin that should also allow them to bring dead back to life and prove Sarah's innocence. Unfortunately, all of that will have to wait as the side of the shuttle suddenly blows open and the alien crashes the party. It knocks Sarah out and grabs Mark by the neck. Mark is able to lodge a grenade into its belly and kill the creature, but the pendant is pulled off of Mark and he's unable to pull it from the alien's death grip. The shuttle is about to explode, so Mark has no choice but to open a time door and jump through it with Sarah, leaving the pendant behind. They both arrive in some medieval time and are surrounded by knights on horseback. Sarah is captured and Mark is left in the rider's dust. An old man calls to Mark, asking if he's willing to risk his life for his loved one. The man points Mark in the right direction and even offers him his sword.
Take this. I have no use for it anymore.
The ruler of this area is a man named Scarabaeus, and he has a right-hand man named George.
Your Majesty.
The guards announce that Scarabaeus' sister has been found, and in walks Sarah. In this time, Sarah is a girl named Madeline, and Scarabaeus has a plot to use Madeline to take the throne, but we don't know much of that yet. She is sent to her quarters to be watched until the day of her wedding. However, Mark has infiltrated the castle and sneaks Sarah out of her room. It seems that she's been drugged, so it's slow going, and as they take a break, Mark observes an odd ritual in the chamber below. He watches as a girl is transformed into a mixture of jaguar and human. They take blood from the creature's paw, and Scarabaeus greedily drinks it all up. Mark and Sarah wait for the ritual to end, and they enter the chamber to read about what black magic is being performed. It looks like Scarabaeus is trying to create a way to transform into any living creature, and he's nearly perfected the ritual. Unfortunately, George walks in with a few guards and he captures Mark. He tells Sarah that if she wants Mark to live, she will do as he says.
You see, if you stop thinking with your poussoir and be a good girl, then I will make sure that Philip escapes.
That night, the castle hosts the king for a banquet, and everyone knows that the king will be asking for Sarah's hand in marriage. While Mark is trying to figure out what to do, the voice of Sir Wilfrid calls out, but the man is now in the form of a crow. He says that this time is actually a realm where good and evil battle to try and tip the scales in the direction of God or the devil. He says that he can help, but only has the power to do so one time. He frees Mark and gives him a new pendant, leaving him a warning that he will only be able to use the time door that will get him back to his proper time once more. And just to clarify, he'll be able to use it to get to other time periods indefinitely. It's only his specific time that has this specific rule. He leaves Mark with one more cryptic clue of how to get the pendant to work before flying off.
Take a minute to think about it, then guess.
At the banquet, George slips some powder into the king's drink, causing the man to get so tired that he needs to be escorted into his bedchamber. Mark makes his prison break and releases all of the other prisoners to help him fight.
Let's go kick some butt!
Scarabaeus says that he will be fetching his physician, but we all know that the dude is up to no good. He goes into his chamber and has his men perform the ritual that we saw earlier, only instead of turning into a cat hybrid, he transforms into the king himself. Mark and the prisoners have made it to the king's bedchamber, but they're easily stopped by the guards. Mark says that he believes the king's life is in danger due to black magic and has the guards go check his room. When they get there, the king is standing and seems completely fine. However, the guard notices that the king's crest ring is gone, and Mark sees a piece of cloth in the headboard. He finds a secret passage and enters to find the real king about to be sacrificed. The guards rush in and save the true king.
I can't thank you enough. It was an honor. Your Majesty. Your Majesty.
When they get back, we see that the guards let the imposter king go.
I mean, he was the king, wasn't he? I mean, I couldn't have stopped him. Could I?
Mark then runs through the castle looking for Sarah. He finds them in the ritual room that we saw earlier, and Scarabaeus removes his king disguise. One guard tries to stop Mark, but after a quick duel, Mark drops an absurdly large book onto the man's face and squashes him. Mark then passes out, and when Sarah says that she loves Mark and not Scarabaeus, the not-so-kingly man doesn't take it well at all.
George, kill the
Totally.
George does his best, but Mark grabs the man's family jewels and puts a stop to his fight real quick. Now Scarabus is taking things into his own hands, and he and Mark begin their duel. While they clash blades, the pendant is torn from Mark and it opens a portal. The fighting doesn't stop as they enter the realm of Dr. Jekyll. However, the pendant doesn't close, so the time doors are all over the place and they stay open. As they fight, they wander into a zombie-infested mall. Mark and Scarabus fight together for just a few seconds, and Mark cuts off one of the zombies' hands. The craziness continues into the world of Jack the Ripper just as he's about to make a kill. Mark, with the hand in hand, rushes to help while still fighting off Scarabus. He kicks the serial killer into a silent film starring Nosferatu. Also, that's Drew Barrymore in the bed for a brief cameo, just thought that was kind of cool. They exit the silent vampire flick only to arrive in the middle of a city as it's being rampaged by freaking Godzilla.
Oh no!
The portal opens back up to the medieval world, and the battle between Mark and Scarabus continues until they reach the room where his human-animal hybrids are kept. Mark pushes Scarabus into the cages, and the monsters rip him apart. Mark was able to keep the zombie hand, but now he and Sarah try to figure out how to get back to their time. Sarah realizes that the quote that Sir Wilfrid said was from Alice in Wonderland, and the portal must be in the castle's looking glass. They run to the mirror and open the pendant, revealing the portal that they needed. However, as they're running, the guard that got squished jumps out and grabs Mark. Sarah kills the man with a morning star, but the portal has lost strength, and they realize that only one of them can travel back to their timeline. Mark shoves the hand into Sarah's hand and tells her to use it to prove that she's innocent before he pushes her into the portal.
I love you, Sarah.
When Sarah gets back to the present, she wanders over to the painting that she saw earlier, and she reveals it to see that it's an image of Mark. Sarah then attends her trial, and with the evidence of the living hand, she's found not guilty. She walks out of the courtroom and through the crowd of paparazzi, but a delivery man pushes through. He has an old package that had specific instructions on being delivered to Sarah on this day after this verdict. So she opens it and she finds the Cartagrian pendant and a note that says, "Join me."
I'm going back.
She hops into a taxi and we see a flash as a time door opens, and that is where the Waxwork duology ends. Where I think Waxwork 1 is a good movie, I straight up love the sequel. Like, you can tell that the first one had a lot of ambition, but the second film's larger budget allowed for that ambition to really shine and just like, I don't know, it just all came together so well. Each sequence in the other times were so stylized, and it's clear that a lot of love was poured into these movies. The final sequence between Mark and Scarabus, where they fight through multiple timelines, was something that I was almost giddy while watching. Like, I had so much fun shouting out the movies that they were entering, and picking up all of the little details that were scattered in each of the set pieces. It was so cool, man. I also love how minimal the connecting story is when it comes to each of these movies. The first is all about Mark wanting to get with China, and then it's just about finding their lost friends, while the second has Sarah and Mark trying to find a way to prove that a disembodied hand could have killed a man. It was simple and minimal, and it allowed me to really enjoy what was going on in each scene, instead of having my mind wander to what would happen to these characters in the future. Like, I'm the kind of guy that really likes to guess what's going to happen in a movie, but with these really, really minimal plots, it didn't happen. Like, the enjoyment wasn't about what's going to come next, it was about what's happening right now, and it was, man, it was awesome. Apparently there was a planned third movie in the Waxwork universe, but it never took off, and it left us with this partial cliffhanger of Sarah and Mark's story. It's a bummer because Waxwork really proved itself to be fantastic, and I would have loved to see what a third installment would have given us, but my feedback's like 30 years too late, so oh well, I guess. Anyway, what did you think, and did you enjoy Waxwork as much as I did? If you did, then don't forget to leave a like as well as subscribe so that you don't miss out on the next video. But yeah, watch out for murderous hands and time doors disguised as wax displays. Bye bye.
face conviction, a serious case in the courtroom. Listen, to prove your innocence is a tedious task. Look at the bailiff and he starts to laugh. It's criminal, minimal, subliminal. You pace through the pot like an animal. You pick up the phone and you're standing alone. Try dialing reality and nobody's home. You lack evidence, it's no coincidence. They put up a fence, hid the clues, and suppress the news. You're living like a psycho, but they won't let go amid evil trauma. Now it's time to flow. But on the contrary, Mark ain't a Mark, cause Mark got heart. But Mark won't stop, cause Mark is a part of the mystery. Back and forth through history, he's seen it time again, so the story begins.
Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are.
Waxwork, taxing, Waxwork 2, what in the hell can young Sarah do? Something's got a hold of a soul and took control, and the devil tried to break the mold, but it's the king of the kings, the lord of lords. It's a medieval party and a tarnished sword. Girls run around on Sunset Strip, but out came the man, yo, Jack the Rip. He was slicing and dicing and smashing and crashing, all through the party, slashing heads. Yo, what up with Frank? Frankie walked around like the living dead, trying to scoop up a troop up a bowl of fruit loop of a juicy fruit tea. Tapped it with a until the mom was down. Jack the Ripper would never be found. A time warrior going through hell. He has a story to tell.
Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are.
Like a bug in a jar, no matter where you are. The same place is near, maybe someplace far. I rehearse the verse, now the verse I'll flip. I go step by step, and they came equipped to rip. And got candid. I gotta hand it to the monk as he slammed it. And he handed it to me, the D, the A, the D, which follows the B, the I to the G. All together spells L.A. Posse. Yeah! Shout out to God and say, Lord have mercy for giving us the strength to fight the danger zone. But if you're living on the edge, you'll be on your own. There are things that are strange and things that are true. Just imagine if the same games happen to you. If you think you wanna play, then come on through. Take a trip beyond the ropes. Waxwork.
Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are. Lost in time, like a bug in a jar, no matter where you go, there you are.